Relax and listen to the voice. Welcome back to Legends and Creatures from Around the World. This installment is Volume 3. We'll be discussing legends, monsters, cryptids, and creatures from all around the globe. And without any further ado, let's get to it. The Dullahan is a type of legendary creature in Irish folklore. He is depicted as a headless rider on a black horse, or as a coachman who carries his own head. As it is not widely attested to in native sources, including no references to it on the extensive website of the Irish Folklore Commission, there is no doubt as to whether the Dullahan was originally a part of the Irish oral tradition. The Dullahan is depicted as a headless horseman, stereotypically on a black horse, and he is either a headless body without a head, or he carries his own head in his hand or under his arm. The severed head has a revolting appearance, as in the following description from Croker's tale, The Headless Horseman. Such a head no mortal ever saw before. It looked like a large cream cheese hung round with black puddings. No speck of color enlivened the ashy paleness of the depressed features. The skin lay stretched over the unearthly surface, almost like the parchment head of a drum. Two fiery eyes, prodigious circumference, with a strange and irregular motion, flashed like meteors. According to the modern storyteller Tony Locke of County Mayo, the Dullahan's mouth, full of razor-sharp teeth, forms a grin reaching the sides of its head. Its massive eyes constantly dart about like flies, and the flesh has acquired the smell, color, and consistency of moldy cheese. There are also legends and tales mentioning the headless coach, also called a Chupacabra, with the Dullahan as its presumed driver. A soundless coach was referenced by Robert Lind, who gave an account of a silent shadow of a coach passing by, provided by an avowed witness from Connemara. However, William Butler Yeats explained that the deaf coach was so called because of its rumbling sound. According to one witness, only the silent shadow of the horse-drawn hearse, or the silent coach, was seen passing by. In Croker's poem, The Death Coach, the carriage axle is made of a human spine, and the wheel spokes are constructed from thigh bones. A later writer, prosifying this description, supplied additional details so that the two hollow skulls used as lanterns on the carriage are set with candles, and the hammercloth, made of palm material, mildewed by damps, is embellished as being chewed away by worms. The etymology of the Dullahan literally signifies dark, sullen person, according to lexicographer Edward O'Reilly. Dullachan or Durachan are alternate words for this hobgoblin, and these forms suggest etymological descent from dur, meaning anger, or durach, meaning malicious or fierce. The original Irish term contains the stem dub, meaning black in Irish. Dullahan was later glossed as dark, angry, sullen, fierce, or malicious being, encompassing both etymologies, though Thomas Crofton Croker considered the alternative etymology more dubious than the dub, or black etymology. The Dullahan is also called Collain gan Shan, meaning without a head in Irish. A Dullahan appears as a mounted horseman or a coachman, driving a horse-drawn carriage out of graveyards. The rumor of a Dullahan's appearance often develops near a graveyard or a charnel vault where a wicked aristocrat is reputed to be buried. The Dullahan arrives, driving the death coach to the doorstep of a person whose death is approaching. According to Croker, the appearance of the headless coach foreshadows imminent death or misfortune. In Hanlon's Mill, Michael McNoonan is returning from his trip to a shoemaker at Ballyduff County, Cork, Ireland, and during his journey he sees a black coach drawn by 6 headless black horses, driven by a headless coachman clad in black. The next morning, Mick receives news from the huntsman that Master Rixon of Ballygiblin had a fit and died. Croker reports that in one legend, a headless coach would run back and forth from Castle Hyde to a glen and valley beyond the village of Ballyhooly in County Cork. Nearby in another town, it was said that the coach would visit the houses in succession, and whichever occupant dared to open the door would be splashed with a basin of blood by the coachman. There are rumors that golden objects can force the Dullahan to disappear. A modern commentator stated that the Dullahan has the ability to see with a severed head and can use it to scan the countryside for mortals about to die. In contrast, the headless coach in the tale The Harvest Dinner is described as a blind thief, and Croker assumed that he lacks sight. The Dullahan allegedly uses a human spine as a whip, according to a number of modern-day 21st century commentators. The headless coachman merely bears a long whip in Croker's tale, The Harvest Dinner, with which he lashes the horses so furiously that he almost strikes a witness blind in an eye. Croker deduced that the headless creature, as a way of habit, attempts to destroy his witness's eye, or eyes, with his whip, reasoning that the coachman's wrath turns to the onlooker because he lacks the ability to look due to his headlessness. Croker's fairy tale legends and traditions of the south of Ireland in 1928 contained a section on the Dullahan devoted to the lore of headless beings. The tale A Good Woman recounts a peasant's encounter with a cloaked female who turns out to be a Dullahan. A peasant named Larry Dodd, a resident of White Knight's country at the foot of the Galtee Mountains, travels westward to Cashel, where he buys a nag, intending to sell it at Kildorrery at a fair that June evening. He offers a ride to a cloaked female, and when he grabs her to exact a kiss as payment for the ride, he discovers her to be a Dullahan. After losing consciousness, in the church ruins he finds a wheel of torture set with severed heads, or skulls, and headless Dullahans, both men and women and nobles and commoners of various occupations. Larry is offered a drink, and when he is about to compliment it, his head is severed mid-sentence. His head reverts when he regains his senses, and he loses his horse to the Dullahans. Some believe that the Dullahan may be the embodied spirit of the Celtic god Crom Dubh. In Greek mythology, the Minotaur is a mythical creature portrayed during classical antiquity with the head and tail of a bull and the body of a man, or, as described by Roman poet Ovid, a being part man and part bull. The Minotaur dwelt at the center of the labyrinth, which was an elaborate maze-like construction designed by the architect Daedalus and his son Icarus upon the command of King Minos of Crete. The Minotaur was said to have eventually been killed by the Athenian hero Theseus. After ascending to the throne of the island of Crete, Minos competed with his brothers as ruler. Minos prayed to the sea god Poseidon to send him a snow-white bull as a sign of the god's favor. Minos was to sacrifice the bull to honor Poseidon, but owing to the bull's beauty, he decided instead to keep him. Minos believed that the god would accept a substitute sacrifice. To punish Minos, Poseidon made Minos' wife, Pasiphae, fall in love with the bull. Pasiphae had the craftsman Daedalus fashion a hollow wooden cow, which she climbed into to mate with the bull. She then bore Asterius, the Minotaur. Pasiphae nursed the Minotaur, but he grew in size and became ferocious. As the unnatural offspring of a woman and a beast, the Minotaur had no natural source of nourishment, and thus devoured humans for sustenance. Minos, following advice from the oracle at Delphi, had Daedalus construct the gigantic labyrinth to hold the Minotaur. The location of the labyrinth was near the palace in Knossos. The Minotaur is commonly represented in classical art with the body of a man and the head and tail of a bull. According to Sophocles, when the river spirit Achilles seduced Deianira, one of the guises he assumed was a man with the head of a bull. From classical antiquity through the Renaissance, the Minotaur appears at the center of many depictions of the labyrinth. Ovid's Latin account of the Minotaur, which did not describe which half was bull and which half was man, was the most widely available during the Middle Ages, and several later versions show a man's head and torso on a bull's body, the reverse of the classical configuration, reminiscent of a centaur. This alternative tradition survived into the Renaissance and is reflected in Dryden's elaborated translation of Virgil's description of the Minotaur. The lower part a beast, a man above, the monument of their polluted love. All of the stories agree that Prince Androgeus, son of King Minos, died and that the fault lay with the Athenians. The sacrifice of young Athenian men and women was a penalty for his death. In some versions, he was killed by the Athenians because of their jealousy of the victories he had won at the Panatheniac Games. In others, he was killed at Marathon by the Cretan bull, his mother's former Taurine lover, because the king of Athens had commanded Androgeus to slay it. The common tradition holds that Minos waged a war of revenge for the death of his son, and won. The consequence of Athens losing the war was the regular sacrifice of several of their youths and maidens. One account of the myth said that Minos had led a fleet against Athens and simply harassed the Athenians until they had agreed to send children as sacrifices. In his account of the Minotaur's birth, Catullus refers to yet another version, in which Athens was compelled by the cruel plague to pay penalties for the killing of Androgeon. To avert a plague caused by divine retribution for the Cretan prince's death, the king of Athens had to send into the labyrinth young men at the same time as the best of unwed girls as a feast for the Minotaur. Some accounts declare that Minos required 7 Athenian youths and 7 maidens, chosen by lots, to be sent every 7th year, and some versions say that they were to be sent every year. When the time for the 3rd sacrifice approached, the Athenian prince Theseus volunteered to slay the Minotaur. Isocrates orates that Theseus thought that he would rather die than rule a city that paid a tribute of children's lives to their enemy. He promised his father that he would change the somber black sail of the boat carrying the victims from Athens to Crete and put up a white sail for his return journey if he was successful. The crew were to leave up the black sail if he was killed. In Crete, Minos' daughter, Ariadne, fell madly in love with Theseus and helped him navigate the labyrinth. In most accounts, she gave him a ball of thread, allowing him to retrace his path to avoid becoming lost. According to various classical sources and representations, Theseus killed the Minotaur with his bare hands, in other accounts sometimes with a club or a sword. He then led the Athenians out of the labyrinth, and they sailed with Ariadne away from Crete. On the way home, Theseus abandoned Ariadne on the island of Naxos and continued to Athens. The returning group neglected to replace the black sail with the promised white sail, and from his lookout on Cape Sunion, the king of Athens saw the black-sailed ship approach. Presuming his son dead, he killed himself by leaping into the sea that has since been named after him. His death secured the throne for Theseus. The Minotaur also appears briefly in the book Dante's Inferno. In Canto 12, where Dante and his guide Virgil find themselves picking their way among boulders dislodged on the slope and preparing to enter into the seventh circle of hell. Dante and Virgil encounter the beast first among the men of blood, those damned for their violent nature. Some commenters believe that Dante, in reversal of classical tradition, bestowed the beast with a man's head upon a bull's body, though this representation had already appeared in the Middle Ages. Minotaur was originally a proper noun in reference to this mythic figure. That is, there was only the one Minotaur. In contrast, the use of Minotaur as a common noun to refer to members of a generic species of bull-headed creatures developed much later in the 20th century genre of fantasy fiction. With this entry, we stay near Greece as we discuss Arachne. Arachne was allegedly a great weaver who boasted that she was better than Athena, the goddess of wisdom, weaving, and strategy. Arachne was born from a shepherd's daughter and began weaving at a young age. When Arachne refused to acknowledge that her skill came in part, at least, from the goddess, Athena took offense and set up a contest between the two. Presenting herself as an old lady, she approached the boasting girl and told her that she could never compare to any of the gods and asked her to give her forgiveness. Arachne then told the old lady that she speaks the truth and told Athena that she should come down herself and challenge her. Athena then removed her disguise and appeared in shimmering glory. The two began weaving away, and after they were done, Athena saw that Arachne's work was far more beautiful than hers. At this, she became enraged, and she ripped Arachne's work into shreds and sprinkled her with Hecate's potion, turning her into a spider so that Arachne would realize her mistake and also to teach her to show respect to the gods and goddesses and their work. Athena's weaving represented 4 separate contests between mortals and the gods, in which the gods punished mortals for setting themselves as equals of the gods. Arachne's weaving depicted ways that the gods, particularly Zeus, had misled and abused mortals, tricking and seducing many women. When Athena saw that Arachne had not only insulted the gods, but had done so with a work that was far more beautiful than her own, she was enraged. One version of these events states that Athena then ripped Arachne's work to shreds and hit her on the head 3 times with her shuttle. Shaken and embarrassed by this encounter, Arachne was then said to take her own life by hanging. According to this version, Athena then felt pity for the girl and transformed her into a spider, which could then go on to create webs for all time, as would also her descendants. Athena did so by sprinkling her with the juice of Hecate's herb. A passage regarding this reads as follows: "And immediately, at the touch of this dark poison, Arachne's hair fell out. With it went her nose and ears. Her head shrank to the smallest size, and her whole body became tiny. Her slender fingers stuck to the sides as legs. The rest is belly, from which she still spins a thread, and as a spider, weaves her ancient web." The myth of Arachne can also be seen as an attempt to show relation between art and tyrannical power in Ovid's time. Ovid wrote under the Emperor Augustus and was exiled by him. At the time, weaving was a common metaphor for poetry. Therefore, Arachne's artistry and Athena's censorship to it may offer a provocative allegory of the writer's role under an autocratic regime. In contemporary fiction, gargoyles are typically depicted as a generally winged humanoid race with demonic features, which include horns, a tail, talons, and facial features which may or may not have a beak. Gargoyles can generally use their wings, if they have any, to fly or glide, and are often depicted as having a rocky hide or being capable of turning into stone in one way or another, which is a reference to their structural roots. If they do not possess wings, they will scale the building's outer walls and either walk the streets at night or they will go inside of the buildings. Gargoyles have been said to protect buildings from evil spirits. In some variations, gargoyles is used as the evil beings that eat humans, but as said before, they are usually used to protect places from evil. It has been said that gargoyles can only communicate when either the wind or the rain passes between their mouths. Strangely enough, it has also been said to have been known that gargoyles have the strange ability of water manipulation. In architecture, a gargoyle is a stone-carved masterpiece, with a spout designed to convey water away from a roof and away from the side of the buildings to prevent water from running down masonry walls and eroding the mortar between. Architects often used multiple gargoyles on buildings to divide the flow of rainwater off of the roof to minimize the potential damage from a rainstorm. The term originates from the French Gargoyle, which in English is likely to mean throat, or is otherwise known as the gullet. In Latin, gorgilio, gula, gargula, which means gullet or throat, and similar words derived from the root gar, which means to swallow, and which also represents the gurgling sound of water. Le gargoyle is said to have been the typical dragon with bat-like wings, a long neck, and the ability to breathe fire from its mouth. There are multiple versions of the story, either that Saint Romanus subdued the creature with a crucifix, or that he captured the creature with the help of the only volunteer, a condemned man. In each version, the monster is led back to Rouen and burned, but its head and neck would not burn due to being tempered by its own fiery breath. The head was then mounted on the walls of the newly built church to scare off evil spirits and used for protection. Gargoyles are often seen as ugly creatures who do nothing. In reality, gargoyles ward off evil spirits and presences. Churches often had these creatures on the roof to ward off the devil and demons. Somewhere along the way, gargoyles were seen as evil and were subsequently taken down. Gargoyles are guardians and protectors, and they do no harm to anyone. Gargoyles are often seen as evildoers and often hide in the shadows to do this. They have been known to step in the light for someone strongly willing to see them, and have been known to bond with anyone who truly believes that they are good. A gargoyle is a creature that comes to life during the night and turns to stone during the day. They are often believed by many to be alive, and some claim to see through their stone exterior. Those who truly have respect for such a creature tend to bow their heads in respect, and the creature often will return the respect. The gargoyle can be of any shape and size, some having beaks while others have hooves. There are many different types of gargoyles, but the most common are the feline-looking ones with chains on their necks. While the chain seems to have a few meanings, the most common one is for control. To chain a beast is to control the beast. While gargoyles may enjoy being bonded to someone, they often do not like being controlled. They will also never harm anyone in any way for anyone else. Gargoyles are often the best guardians and protectors because not much can harm them. The Kelpie is a cryptid from rivers and lochs in Scotland and Ireland. In mythology, the Kelpie is described as a strong and powerful horse. It is white and sky blue in color, and originally appeared as a lost pony, but could be identified by its constantly dripping mane. Its mane and tail are a bit curly, and its skin is said to be that of a seal, smooth but as cold as death when touched. Kelpies were said to transform into beautiful women to lure men into their traps. They created illusions to keep themselves hidden, keeping only their eyes above water to scout the surface. The fable of the Kelpie varies by region. The Kelpie's mane is said to be a sky blue color. The water horse is a common form of the Kelpie, said to lure humans into the water to drown them. The water horse would encourage people to ride on its back, and once its victims fell into its trap, the water horse's skin would become adhesive, and the horse would bear the victim into the river, dragging them to the bottom of the water and devouring every piece of them, except the heart or liver. A common Scottish tale is the story of 9 children who were lured onto a Kelpie's back, while a 10th child kept his distance. The Kelpie chased the 10th child, but he escaped. Another more gruesome and macabre variation on this tale is that the 10th child simply stroked the Kelpie's nose, but when his hand stuck to it, he took a knife from his pocket and cut his own hand off, cauterizing it with wood from a nearby fire. Variations in physical attributes that can help to distinguish a Kelpie from a regular horse are that Kelpies can be black or gray. They can also be identified from a normal horse by the webbing between the large crack in their hooves. They allegedly have frilled ears, forward-facing eyes, and their eyes are said to be slightly red. When they are disguised as a human, they can easily be identified by underwater plants woven into their hair. La Ciguapa, or Ciguapas, are alleged Bigfoot or Chupacabra-like creatures of Dominican and Haitian folklore. They are commonly described as having a human female form with brown or dark blue skin, backwards-facing feet, and very long manes of smooth, glossy hair that covers their bodies. They supposedly inhabit the high mountains of the Dominican Republic. Neocnus is an extinct genus of ground sloth, whose species ranged across Cuba and Hispaniola, formerly Haiti and the Dominican Republic. They went extinct more recently than other ground sloths, about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. These creatures are said to have nocturnal habits. Also, due to the position of their feet, one can never quite tell which direction the beings are moving by looking at their footprints. Some people believe that they bring death, and it is said that one should not look them in the eye, otherwise the person is at risk of being bewitched permanently. The only vocalization made by Ciguapas is said to be a kind of whine or chirping sound. One of the leading cryptozoologists in the world, Lauren Coleman, says, "Indeed, the Chupacabra is said to be called Ciguapa in the Dominican Republic, as well as being called Maboya in the language of the original people of Haiti." Described as bipedal, alert, 4 to 5 feet tall, and covered in short gray fur with spiny hair, the nocturnal Chupacabras of Hispaniola are said to be livestock killers there, just as they are throughout the Caribbean. The reports, which are concentrated from Puerto Rico, are much more active for the Dominican Republic versus Haiti. The Haitian voodoo spirit, Grand Bois, lives in the deep forest where the vegetation is wild. He is a protector of wildlife and doesn't like to be seen. The Ciguapas are said to choose to stay there, to stay nearby, and to take advantage of the protection that is offered. The Neocnus is an extinct genus of ground sloth, whose species ranged across Cuba and Hispaniola. Neocnus would have resembled a typical ground sloth, though much smaller, with a longer tail and a broad trunk, as well as lisome limbs and long claws. This sloth was known for having caudal vertebrae that were broad, which is a trait shared with other ground sloths, indicating that this animal, like the tamandua of today, likely used its tail to stand upright. It is theorized by many that La Ciguapa and the Chupacabra is a sloth, in common with other Antillean sloths, and was actually killed off by humans seeking its pelt and meat. The Genderuwo, or Genderuwo, is a mythical creature from Java, Indonesia. It is described as reddish or a black-skinned hairy humanoid with a large and muscular body. Within Javanese mythology, this creature is said to be supernatural in nature, with the ability to disappear and appear at will or transform into a human. The Genderuwo is described generally as a muscular, hairy humanoid with reddish-black skin and bulging eyes. But because of its supernatural ability, it may appear at first as a hairy dwarf humanoid, but can transform quickly into a gigantic humanoid once approached by a human. It is also said to have the ability to communicate with humans and even transform into a human to trick others. It is said that the Genderuwo possesses a magnificent sex drive and hypnotic skills. They seduce women by transforming into their husbands and inhabit the female's uterus to gain sexual satisfaction for both itself and the woman that it inhabits. It can even produce human Genderuwo hybrids from this relationship. Because of this, Vice described Genderuwo as the great-granddaddy of obscure monster erotica. Genderuwo is said to be seen all over Java Island. If you asked any Javanese villager, there's a chance that they might have seen one. Genderuwo form colonies on various forests and mountains within Java, but they are also found individually hiding on huge trees or bamboo forests near human habitations. Just like the other ghosts and creatures found in Indonesia, they can also inhabit dark and humid places like abandoned buildings. The Genderuwo are sighted all over Java, but no one cared enough to document them. Most people there seem to be aware of where they might appear or where they may live, and they move on with their lives. But some stories still appear on television and the internet. The sea monk, or sometimes known as the sea bishop, was the name given to a sea animal found off the eastern coast of the Danish island of Zealand in 1546. It has also been sighted by two fishermen and some nearby swimmers in Pula, Croatia, in the year 2011, and is one of the more popular sightings of the cryptids in the Adriatic Sea. It was described early on as a fish that looked superficially like a monk. It was mentioned and pictured in the 4th volume of Conrad Gessner's famous Historia Animalium. Gessner also referenced a similar monster found in the 5th of 4th, according to Boethius, in a sighting off of the coast in Poland in 1531. The sea monk was subsequently popularized in Guillaume du Bartha's epic poem La Septième Nuit, Création du Monde, where the poet speaks of correspondences between land and sea animals. The following is an excerpt. Seas have, as well as skies have, a sun, a moon, and stars, as well as ire. Swallows and rooks and stairs, as well as earth. Vines, roses, nettles, millions, pinks, gillyflowers, mushrooms, and many millions of other plants' lands, many more and strange than these, as very fishes living in the seas, and also rams, calves, horses, hares, hogs, and wolves, lions, urchins, elephants and dogs, yea, men and maids, and which I more admire, the mitred bishopand, the cowled friar, whereof examples, but a few years since, were shewn in the Norways and Polonian prints. Steenstrup's comparison of a squid to the two drawings of the sea monk from the 16th century in the early 1950s. Danish zoologist Geppetta Steenstrup suggested that the sea monk was a giant squid, a theory more recently popularized by writer Richard Ellis. Cryptozoologist Bernard Heuvelmans believed that the report was based on the discovery of an errant walrus. More recently, it has been suggested that the sea monk was actually just an angel shark, which is commonly called monkfish in English or monk in Norwegian. Other suggested suspects for the sea monk include a gray seal, a hooded seal, a monk seal, or a hoax such as a Jenny Hanover. Jenny Hanovers are hoaxes from the old Dutch times. They were actually raised in devilfish, carved to make them look like sea monks or bishopfish. They are usually shown off as proof of dragons, fairies, or mermaids. The Jenny Hanovers also have a strange humanoid look to them. The sea bishop, or bishopfish, was a type of sea monster reported in the 16th century. According to legend, it was taken to the King of Poland, who wished to keep it. It was also then shown to a group of Catholic bishops, to whom the bishopfish allegedly gestured, appealing to be released. The bishops granted its wish, at which point it made the sign of the cross, and then disappeared into the sea. Another was supposedly captured in the ocean near Germany in 1531. This sea bishop refused to eat and died after 3 days. It was described and pictured in the 4th volume of Conrad Gessner's famous Historiae Animalium. The beast of Gevaudan is a creature that was held responsible for at least 60 animal attack deaths during the 1760s in France. Some reports put the death toll over 100, but there has been difficulty in proving more than about 60 of the cases. Several traditional depictions of the beast of Gevaudan show the wide variety of physical characteristics that were attributed to this monster. If there was a real animal behind these sightings and reports, it is obscured by the great deal of folklore. Locals believed it was a werewolf, or more specifically, a sorcerer who shapeshifted into a monstrous predator in order to feed on human flesh. It was supposed to be bulletproof as well, until the day that a hunter named Jean Chastel tried a silver bullet. It has been speculated that it was a hyena trained by Chastel, but this does not fit logic or description. Descriptions of the beast varied so much that most researchers believed there had to be at least 2 of the creatures, if indeed the panic wasn't causing the populace to incorporate almost any large animal into these sightings. The color of the beast's fur was especially variable. Sometimes it was red with a large gray patch, or red with faint stripes along the back. Other times, it had black and white patches spotted all over its body, with no trace of red. Rarely, it had colors or patterns that didn't incorporate red, black, or white. If you add up all the differing descriptions and then create a composite description out of those characteristics that are mentioned with consistency and by the most witnesses, then the beast looked something like this. The beast was a quadruped about the size of a horse. It reminded witnesses of a bear, a female hyena due to its large size, a wolf, and a panther all at once. It possessed a long wolf-like or pig-like snout lined with great large teeth. The ears of the creature were small and round, laying very close to its head. The neck is described to be as long and very strong, and the tail somewhat resembles the long tail of a panther, but it was so thick and strong that the beast used it as a weapon, knocking men and animals down with it. Anyone struck by the tail reports that it hits with considerable force. The feet of the beast are the hardest to describe. Some say that it had cloven hooves, or that each digit on its foot was tipped with a hoof. Others say that it had claws which were so heavy, thick, and formidable that they merely resembled hooves. Since there does not seem to be any more sightings of animals like the beast in France, or any historical precedent for animals like it in the area before the first sighting, it is a hard creature for cryptozoologists to tackle. Most mythical animals that are taken seriously by cryptozoologists have some sort of history that indicates there could have been a breeding population from ancient times. Single animals are hard to handle from a cryptozoological standpoint. On the other hand, all available evidence seems to indicate that, if the beast was real, there were at least two of its kind. If we wanted to, we may also be able to presume that a mated pair or a small pack migrated hundreds of miles to reach France from some area where such creatures did have a history, or that they were secretly or inadvertently transported by humans. Such speculations are far-fetched, but they would be necessary for most cryptozoological analyzations to succeed. The other alternative would be to presume that these creatures had been living secretly in France since ancient times without making a splash on local folklore, which truly doesn't make much sense for a supposed undiscovered species. It would be nice to be able to declare the beast of Gevaudan a hyena, a bear, an escaped lion, or something like that. But in order to do so, we must disregard witness testimony. Of course, in this case, witness testimony is so riddled with the supernatural that we would have to disregard some of it anyway. But if we accept the core description of the beast as having any validity, we must also acknowledge that the creature described does not match any known animal. Parts of the creature match wolves, hyenas, and panthers, with hyenas probably being the best fit. But we run into serious problems when we try to bend witness testimony to fit a known animal. Unless we toss it all out as superstition, we end up with a beast that certainly seems cryptozoological in the best sense of the word, as it is a genuine puzzle. If the beast existed and wasn't any normal species, what could it be? Most explanations put forth hybrid or deformed versions of the several known species that most resembled the beast of Gevaudan. The idea of wolf-dog hybrids was popular for so long that it was almost accepted that a solution had been found. However, they would have to be a pretty odd wolf-dog hybrid in order to adhere to the core description of the beast. A weird, bear sort of mutant might work, if it were mutated in just the right way, but that bear mutant would also need a tail. Hyenas are just not big enough to be the beast, so once again, we would need to propose a mutant or a hybrid, as well as the problem that hyenas have been extinct in Europe for a very long time. Since cryptozoologists are only ultimately interested in discovering new species or subspecies, if the beast was proven to be a mutant or hybrid of some kind, then it would cease to be of any interest to cryptozoology. If the beast of Gevaudan were a new species or subspecies, there are several possibilities. It could be a new bear, possibly a new big cat, or some sort of surviving creature of a prehistoric European hyena, or something even more exotic. There is, in fact, a type of animal that fits the core description of the beast exactly, but it is extinct and would hardly be expected to have survived in Europe of all places. This group of animals would be the Masoniakids, a presumably extinct group of hoofed predators. The biggest Masoniakid looked much like the hyena and was about the size of a horse. Some other reports that may describe Masonia kids come from Armenia and Assyria in about the year 800 and describe pig-like beasts that are vicious predators but have huge, floppy ears instead of the beast's described tiny, round ears. Another possible Masonia kid is reported from a more plausible place, the Amazon rainforest of South America. This creature is called the tapir uara. As you can see, there are many explanations for the beast of Gevaudan. Scientists run from one explanation to another as fads come and go. Almost everything that is remotely conceivable has been proposed as an explanation. This discussion has been limited to the more likely prospects as viewed by the science of cryptozoology, because otherwise this episode would have been entirely on the beast of Gevaudan. There are other explanations rooted more in fields outside of cryptozoology, such as the study of folklore and hoaxes. For example, the fictional movie Brotherhood of the Wolf presents an elaborate explanation for the beast that manages to neatly tie up most of the loose ends that frustrate scientists by proposing that it was all an elaborate hoax. A beast fitted with armor and trained to be a killer. One recent claim is that the stuffed body of the creature was found in a museum in central France, and studies suggest that it was actually a brown hyena, which is now believed to have belonged to the hunter who killed it. The Bunyip, also known as the Kianprati, is a creature from the Aboriginal mythology in southeastern Australia. It is said to live in swamps, billabongs, creeks, riverbeds, and waterholes. The word Bunyip translates to devil or evil spirit from the Wemba Wemba language. Physical descriptions of the Bunyip vary. Some say it has a dog-like face, dark fur, a horse-like tail, flippers, walrus-like tusks, a crocodile-like head, and a duck-like bill. There are even claims that it resembles a snake with a beard. While its wide range of descriptions make it difficult to determine its appearance, it is agreed that the Bunyip is aquatic. In popular media, the Bunyip has showed up in many a place. The Bunyip is a summonable creature in the Scribblenaught games. The Bunyip appears in the animated series The Secret Saturdays. An Australian horror movie titled Bunyip is about a group of city folk who decide to hike in the Australian wilderness, but end up getting lost and have to survive against the legendary creature. Another Australian horror movie titled Red Billabong concerns two brothers who uncover their family's secrets and realize that their friends go missing, but don't realize that the legendary Bunyip is to blame and is now stalking them. In the Australian children's book, The Bunyip of Berkeley's Creek, the Bunyip tries to figure out what bunyips look like. The other animals describe bunyips as horrible creatures, so the Bunyip decides to live alone where he can be as handsome as he likes. A Bunyip was a titan featured in Godzilla, King of the Monsters, hibernating in Ayers Rock in Australia. However, its name only appears on a monitor. It was awakened in the film by Geodora's alpha call. A Bunyip appears as a docile creature in a Sonic the Hedgehog comic book. Dingodile, from the Crash Bandicoot video game series, may have been inspired by the Bunyip. Throughout Australia where the Bunyip allegedly resides, there are underwater animatronics such as the Bunyip of Murray Bridge. One of the earliest accounts of the Bunyip occurred in 1818, when explorers James Meehan and Hamilton Hume discovered large bones in Lake Bathurst in New South Wales. They did not call the creature a Bunyip, but described the remains as similar to a manatee or a hippopotamus. In the mid-1830s, fossilized bones were first discovered by George Rankin and later by Thomas Mitchell in the Wellington Caves in New South Wales. British anatomist Sir Richard Owen identified the fossils as the marsupials Diprotodon and Nototherium. In July of 1845, the Geelong Advertiser describes the bunyip in great detail. It was also the first recorded use of the term bunyip. In January of 1847, an unusual skull was found on the Murrumbidgee riverbanks near Balranald, New South Wales. Initial reports suggested that it was the skull of an unidentified creature. By July of 1847, several experts had identified the skull as that of a deformed foal or calf. Despite this, it was put on exhibition at the Australian Museum in Sydney as evidence of the bunyip. One legend says that a man named Bunyip broke the rainbow serpent's greatest law by eating his totem animal. Banished by the spirit Biami, the man became an evil spirit that lured tribesmen and their livestock into the water so that he could eat them. In 1857, in an article titled "The Bunyip," a newspaper reported as follows on the drawings made by Edwin Stockwheeler. Amongst the latter drawings, we noticed a likeness of the bunyip, or rather, a view of the neck and shoulders of the animal. Mr. Stockwheeler informs us that the bunyip is a large freshwater seal having two small padules or fins attached to the shoulders, a long swan-like neck, a head like a dog, and a curious bag hanging under the jaw, resembling the pouch of a pelican. The animal is covered with hair, like the platypus, and the color is glossy black. Mr. Stockwheeler saw no less than 6 of these curious animals at different times. His boat was within 30 feet of one near McGuire's Punt on the Goulburn, and he fired at the bunyip, but did not succeed in capturing him. The smallest appeared to be about 5 feet in length, and the largest exceeded 15 feet. The head of the largest was said to be the size of a bullock's head, and 3 feet out of the water. After taking a sketch of the animal, Mr. Stockwheeler showed it to several blacks of the Goulburn tribe, who declared that the picture was Bunyip's brother, meaning a duplicate or a likeness of the bunyip. The animals moved against the current at the rate of about 7 miles an hour, and Mr. Stockwheeler states that he could have approached close to the specimens he observed had he not been deterred by the stories of the natives concerning the power and fury of the bunyip, and by the fact that his gun had only a single barrel and his boat was of a very frail description. The bunyip could possibly be a misidentification of a known species, with suggestions such as the leopard or elephant seals, cassowaries, and Australian bitterns. It is also believed that the bunyip could be a surviving Diprotodon or another extinct Australian marsupial. Alien, demon, or genetic mutation. The Enfield Horror, encountered in Enfield, Illinois, is one of the absolute strangest creatures ever to be chronicled in cryptozoological lore. The bizarre string of events that would eventually stir the small Illinois town of Enfield into a frenzy of fear began on the chilly night of April 25th, 1973, when a young boy named Greg Garrett claimed to have been attacked by a truly bizarre beast while playing in his backyard. The child described the beast as having no less than 3 legs, grayish, slimy skin, short claws, and reddish eyes. The creature apparently stamped on the boy's feet with its own 3, apparently clawed, foot-like appendages, tearing his tennis shoes to shreds. Greg, then crying hysterically, wasted no time scurrying away from the fiend and back into the relative safety of his parents' home. Although young Greg's encounter was technically the first on record, the one that brought this creature to notoriety came just a half an hour later when the Garrett's neighbor, one Henry McDaniel, and his family had their own face-to-face encounter with this unbelievable entity. At about 9:30 in the evening, the McDaniels returned home to find two of their children, Henry Jr. and Lil, in a terrified stupor. The children claimed that a thing had tried to break into the house through the door and a window-mounted air conditioner while their parents were gone. It was then that they all heard a scratching sound at the front door. Assuming that it was some sort of stray animal, a skeptical Henry McDaniel cavalierly approached the door and yanked it open. What he saw before him would have shaken even the most courageous man to the core. There, standing on his stoop, was the same red-eyed monstrosity that had terrified his own children and assailed the Garrett child less than an hour before. McDaniel backed away from the entity in horror, slammed the door, stumbled to the nearby closet, and retrieved a flashlight and his .22 gauge pistol. While his horrified family waited, Henry returned to the door, and with the conviction of a man dead set on defending his family and home, he threw the door back open, revealing that his first vision of this unbelievable beast had not been a hallucination. Later, McDaniel described the creature to the police as follows. It had 3 legs on it, a short body, 2 little short arms coming out of its breast area, and 2 pink eyes as big as flashlights. It stood about 4.5 feet tall and was grayish colored. It was trying to get into the house. McDaniels opened fire on the creature, hitting it immediately, but instead of falling to the ground, wounded or dead, the horrible thing merely hissed like a wildcat at the frightened homeowner. Henry, who had fired 4 shots at the thing, assured anyone who asked that he had not missed his quarry. When I fired that first shot, I know that I hit it. Then, as unbelievable as it may seem, McDaniel claimed that the zoological oddity then tore off into the night, covering an area of approximately 50 feet in a series of just 3 astonishing leaps before disappearing into the brush along the L&N Railroad embankment in front of his house. McDaniels promptly called the local authorities, but when Illinois state troopers who responded to the call arrived at the scene, the only evidence of the encounter that remained were a series of scratches in the siding of the McDaniels' home and dog-like prints in the yard. What made these prints so unusual was the fact that they had 6 toe pads and, even more intriguingly, that they represented a 3-footed animal, with one track being slightly smaller than the others. If McDaniel believed that his encounters with the unknown were a thing of the past, he would soon realize that he was sadly mistaken when, on the eve of May 6th, he was startled awake in the dead of night by the howling of some neighborhood dogs. McDaniel pulled himself out of bed, once again claimed his firearm, and with what must have been great trepidation, opened his front door. This time, his encounter with the creature would not be so intimate. He claims that he watched the thing at some distance, languidly negotiating the trestles of the railroad tracks near his home. I saw something moving out on the railroad track, and there it stood. I didn't shoot at it or anything. It just started on down the railroad track. It wasn't in a hurry or anything like that. As is always the case with astounding events such as this, it wasn't long before the press got wind of the weirdness and came out in full force. But it wasn't until McDaniel's second report that the media frenzy truly kicked into overdrive. White County Sheriff Roy Posher Jr. was so perturbed by the sudden influx of press and curiosity seekers, not to mention the alarm that was setting in on the locals, He threatened to incarcerate McDaniel if he didn't stop inciting panic by spreading his wildly terrifying tale. To make matters worse, well-armed posses of amateur monster hunters began patrolling the area near the L&N railroad track sightings. It was on one such expedition that 5 young men allegedly had a run-in with the creature identical to the one that Garrett and McDaniel encountered, with the notable addition being that they described the thing as being hairy. The men discovered the beast hiding in the underbrush and proceeded to open fire on it, but much like in the McDaniel case, their bullets were unable to cause mortal injury, and the monster bolted off at a speed that the eyewitnesses surmised was greatly in excess of any that a human being could have achieved. The final eyewitness to this improbable creature was Rick Rainbow, the news director of radio station WWKI in Kokomo, Indiana. He and 3 other unnamed individuals claimed to have seen a gray, stooping, 5-foot-tall entity lurking outside an abandoned house not far from the Garrett and McDaniel homes. Although they did not have nearly as close, or for that matter, nearly as harrowing, of an encounter as the previous sets of witnesses, Rainbow and his crew did manage to do one thing that the others had not. They were able to tape record the monster's disturbing scream. It was then that noted cryptozoologist Loren Coleman arrived on the scene to investigate the eyewitnesses' claims as well as the sound recording. Coleman also heard the haunting cry of the creature while searching an area where eyewitnesses claimed to have seen the thing. Coleman states, "I traveled to Enfield, interviewed the witnesses, looked at the siding of the house the Enfield monster had damaged. I heard some strange, screeching, banshee-like sounds, and I walked away bewildered." In the July 1974 edition of Fate magazine, Loren Coleman and Jerome Clark featured the Enfield Horror in an article entitled "Swamp Slobs Invade Illinois." Coleman even chronicled discussing this intriguing case with a famed paranormal investigator, as well as best-selling author of the Mothman prophecies, John A. Keel, in his book, Mothman and Other Curious Encounters. This reminds me of my exchange with Keel in 1973, when we were discussing the new reports out of Illinois from Enfield. On April 25, 1973, Mr. and Mrs. Henry McDaniel returned to their home, and Henry had an encounter with a thing that looked like it had 3 legs, 2 pink eyes as big as flashlights, and short arms on a 4.5 feet tall and grayish-colored body along the L&N railroad tracks just in front of his house. Years later, Coleman would contrast his Enfield investigation with another he conducted regarding a legendary creature that many assume was also from alien origin, the melon-headed monster known as the Dover Demon. The Enfield Horror was my case investigation. It was much different than the Dover Demon, however, and was much more like a combo phantom kangaroo, devil monkey, and swamp ape situation. Other investigators have suggested that the monster was associated with a spate of UFO sightings that allegedly plagued the region during the same period, and those with a more supernatural bent have asserted that this beast, with its tendencies to be aggressive towards humans and try to break into their homes, has all the earmarks of a classic demon attack. This would not be the first time that it has been suggested that there is an apparent ET occult connection. While the phenomenon are not directly related, the primary witness in the Northport Devil case, Michael Rowley, also claims that the creatures that have been skulking around the house that he shares with his son in the West Florida community of Northport are of both extraterrestrial and demonic origin, making them, in effect, aliens from hell. It should also be noted that between the years of 1941 and 1942, in the sleepy village of Mount Vernon, which is just less than 40 miles away from Enfield, there was a similar spate of encounters involving an anomalous leaping beast that terrorized the local populace and was reputedly responsible for numerous animal deaths in the region. Eyewitnesses claimed that the Mount Vernon monster was vaguely baboon-like, hence the devil monkey analogy, and able to leap 20 to 40 feet in a single bound. Is it possible that the Enfield Horror, whatever it may be, is working on 30-year cycles? While there are no reputable accounts of the creature coming from the 21st century, one cannot entirely count out the possibility that the thing is a long-slumbering anatomical oddity that rears its head every so often to feed on animals and terrify locals. Or, stranger yet, an ET that only stops by for a bite every so often when it's in this neck of the galaxy. Whatever this creature is or is not, it has not been reported in nearly 40 years. That, however, does not mean that it's not still lurking in the shadows of some old train yard, waiting to return to scratch on another door in the wee hours of the night. Thank you all very much for tuning in to Volume 3 of Legends and Creatures from Around the World. We hope that you've enjoyed these talks of mythical beasts, cryptids, creatures, and entities. Hopefully with this information, you can be on the lookout, stay safe, and take care of yourselves. And always remember to have sweet dreams.